The wind came down from the high country that evening, carrying the kind of cold that finds a man's bones, no matter how long he's been riding. By the time the cowboy reached the edge of the little settlement, his horse was blowing steam and his coat was stiff with frost. There was one light burning in the whole stretch of prairie. A lantern hung beside a small cabin that leaned a little to the left, as if even the house was tired of standing alone. He rode closer, the snow whispering beneath the hooves, and when he stopped he could hear the faint sound of someone humming inside, a woman's voice, soft and sure, like she was singing just to keep the walls warm. He knocked once, twice before she answered. She opened the door only part way, a thin woman in a faded dress and shawl, her hair pinned back, her eyes the color of smoke after rain. "I've got nothing to sell," she said, though her tone was more weary than sharp. "Ain't come to buy," he replied, tipping his hat. "Just need a place to thaw. Won't stay long." She studied him a moment, then nodded toward the chair near the stove. "You can warm yourself, but I've only bread to offer." "Bread's enough," he said. He stepped inside, shutting the cold out with a sigh that sounded like gratitude. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and something clean, like soap and old cedar. On the table sat a single loaf, round and rough, half wrapped in cloth. She cut 2 slices, laid them on a tin plate, and pushed it toward him without sitting down. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, taking it carefully, as if the bread were something holy. She nodded, watching him. "Most men don't say thank you anymore. Most men forgot what it costs to make bread," he said between bites. Her mouth twitched into the smallest smile. "You talk like a preacher." "No, ma'am," he said, "just a man who's been hungry." The fire popped, a spark jumping to the floor, and she bent to brush it away, her hands quick and roughened by work. He noticed the black band tied around her wrist, and the stillness in her movements that only comes after too much waiting. "Your husband?" he asked quietly. "Gone 3 winters," she said. "Snow took the trail, then the trail took him." "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be," she answered. "The land keeps what it wants." He nodded, finishing the bread, setting the plate down like it was part of a ritual. "Good bread," he said, "better than most." "It's plain," she replied. "Plain's what lasts," he said. Their eyes met for the first time, hers steady, his tired but gentle. Outside, the wind shifted, rattling the shutters, and the lantern by the door flickered like a heartbeat. "You sure you won't stay the night?" she asked, her voice softer now. "Got hay in the shed. I can make coffee come morning." He looked toward the door, then back at her. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, "if I stay the night, I might never leave." She froze, the words hanging in the warm air between them like smoke that refused to rise. For a moment neither moved, and then she looked away, back toward the fire. "Then I reckon I'll have to make more bread," she said. He smiled for the first time in a long time, the kind of smile that felt like remembering. And outside, the wind went quiet, as if the land itself was listening to something worth keeping. The next morning broke soft and gray, the kind of dawn that slips into a room without asking. The smell of coffee filled the cabin, and the sound of a knife against wood carried through the quiet like a hymn. Clara stood by the small table slicing the last of the bread, the light from the window washing her hair in silver. Elias sat near the stove, elbows on his knees, watching the steam rise from his cup. He hadn't slept much. Old habits kept him half awake, the kind that grow from too many nights under cold stars. She glanced at him, her eyes careful. "You didn't leave," she said. "Didn't want to waste a sunrise," he answered. She smiled, a small, uncertain thing. "You'll find this place dull." "Peaceful's different than dull," he said, standing to pour himself more coffee. "You mind company?" "I've had ghosts for years," she said. "You're quieter than most." He looked around the room, the patched curtains, the chipped bowl of salt, the cross on the wall carved by hand. "You built this all yourself?" "Me and the wind," she said. "It howls, I mend." She set 2 slices of bread on the plate between them, warm from the stove, and for a moment they just stood there, the silence softening. "You always feed strangers?" he asked. "Only the ones who look hungrier than proud." He grinned faintly. "Then I must have looked starved." "You did," she said, "but not just for food." The words landed between them like something fragile, but true. He took the bread, broke it in half, and handed her the larger piece. "My ma used to say the one who shares first never stays lonely long." Was she right? She died before I learned, he said quietly. She sat, folded her hands on the table. And for a long while, neither spoke. Outside, a crow called and the wind pushed against the shutters like a tired friend. You fix fences? She asked suddenly. I can, he said. Good, she said. The north field's broken and the cattle got no respect for lines. He nodded. Then I'll fix it after breakfast. You don't have to, she said, almost shy. I know, he said, taking another sip. That's why I will. She looked at him a long time, studying his face, the weathered skin, the quiet eyes, the kind of steadiness that only comes from surviving your own storms. You talk like you mean things, she said. Most folks don't. Then they forgot how, he said. You remember? She smiled again, faint but real. Some days, he finished his coffee, set the cup down, and stood. Some's enough, he said. When he reached for his coat, she rose too. Elias, she said. He turned. You're welcome to stay, just until the weather settles. He paused, his eyes catching hers, and the light between them seemed to shift, brighter now. Ma'am, he said, if I stay till the weather settles, you'll never get rid of me. She laughed quietly, shaking her head. Then I'll have to bake more bread. He smiled, tipped his hat, and stepped out into the cold. The door closed softly behind him, and Clara stood for a moment staring at the empty chair, her hands still resting on the table, feeling for the first time in 3 winters that maybe the silence in her house wasn't loneliness anymore. It was the sound of someone coming back to life. The north field stretched out behind the cabin, a mix of mud, brittle grass, and half-frozen ground that crunched under Elias's boots as he walked. The morning air smelled of pine and smoke from the chimney behind him. He carried a hammer, a coil of wire, and the kind of focus that comes from needing something to mend besides yourself. The fence was old, posts leaning, rails loose, a lifetime of winters beating it down, but he liked it that way. Broken things told the truth. He worked steady, sleeves rolled, breath clouding the air. Each swing of the hammer fell like punctuation against silence, until the sound became a rhythm, the heartbeat of a man who'd found purpose again. From the cabin window, Clara watched him, hands still on the dough she'd been kneading. Something in the way he moved, measured, patient, made her chest ache in a way that wasn't sadness. When the kettle whistled, she poured coffee into 2 cups and stepped outside, pulling her shawl close. Elias looked up when she neared. You didn't have to come out, he said. I owed you breakfast. She smiled, handing him the cup. You work like a man with something to prove. Maybe I do, he said. To who? Myself, mostly. He took a drink, the steam curling around his face. You mend fences different than other men, she said. How's that? You don't curse when the wire bites back. He grinned, eyes squinting against the light. Ain't the wire's fault. Pain just means it's holding. She shook her head, laughing softly. You've got a saying for everything. Only for what's worth remembering. They stood there a while. Quiet except for the creak of the wire and the whistle of wind through dry grass. How long you been wandering? She asked. Since I was 17, he said. Army took me, then the road kept me. No home? Had plenty, he said. None that stayed. And now? Now I'm starting to think maybe it's not the home that's missing. Maybe it's me. She looked at him then, really looked. At the scar near his jaw, the gentleness in hands too big for gentleness. You talk like a man who's been alone too long. Takes one to know one, he said. A gust of wind swept through, cold and sharp, and she drew closer to block it. The edge of her shawl brushed his arm, and for a second, neither moved. The space between them felt small, fragile, alive. You're bleeding, she said, spotting a nick on his knuckle. He looked down. Fence bit back after all. She tore a strip from her apron and wrapped it around his hand before he could protest. Her fingers worked gently, steady despite the tremor in her breath. There, she said, all fixed. He studied her face, the strength behind her softness, the kind of quiet that made men stay without knowing why. You fix people like fences, he said. Only when they stop fighting it, she replied. He tightened the last wire, tested it with a pull, then leaned against the post beside her. Looks solid, he said. So does this place. You built half of it today, she said. Guess that makes it ours. He looked at her, eyes warm despite the wind. Hours, he repeated, like he wanted to test how it sounded in his mouth. She smiled, faint but certain. You best come in before you freeze. He nodded, picking up the tools. As they walked back, the sun broke through the clouds, spilling gold across the fence line. Behind them, the repaired rails stood straight against the wind, and for the first time, neither of them looked like they were planning to leave. 3 days later, the sound of hooves broke the quiet morning, the kind of sound that makes the heart remember danger before the mind does. Elias was splitting wood near the barn when he heard it and turned, axe resting against his shoulder, eyes narrowing toward the horizon. A single rider approached from the west, dust trailing behind like an omen. Clara stepped out onto the porch, her hands still dusted with flour, the wind lifting her hair. You expecting anyone? She asked. Not since I stopped running, he said. The rider came closer, slowing near the fence line, a young man clean-faced wearing a deputy's star that didn't yet look heavy enough to belong to him. You Elias Ward, the deputy called. Depends who's asking, Elias replied. Sheriff sent me, the man said. Said to tell you the preacher's gone and the town's looking for someone to take his place. Elias raised a brow, half amused. Ain't that the devil's joke? The deputy shrugged. Heard you used to read scripture to soldiers. Town remembers? Elias wiped his hands on his coat, thinking. And what's that got to do with her? He asked, tilting his head toward Clara. Nothing, the deputy said quickly. She's clear. Folks figured out the truth. I just came to tell you. Clara's breath left her like a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. So it's over, she said softly. Elias nodded once. Looks that way. The young man tipped his hat. Sheriff said if you ever came back, there's land near the river needing hands. Tell him I've got land enough, Elias said. The deputy hesitated, looking between them, then smiled awkwardly. Guess you do. He turned his horse and rode off, the sound fading down the trail until only the wind remained. Clara stood watching until he vanished, her fingers gripping the railing. You could go back, she said quietly. Build something bigger than this. Elias stepped closer, his shadow falling over her shoulder. Bigger don't mean better, he said, and I ain't built for pulpits. Then what are you built for? She asked. He looked past her toward the cabin, where the chimney smoke rose straight into the sky, untroubled. For staying, he said simply. She turned to face him, eyes glistening in the light. You'd stay here? With me? You offered bread, he said. That was enough. She laughed, the sound trembling through her. You can't make a life out of bread. Watch me, he said. She looked down, hiding her smile. You don't even know if I can bake more. I'll chop wood till you do, he said. Her laughter grew, spilling into the air like sunlight after rain. The moment held, long enough for the past to loosen its grip. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch light but certain. You deserve more than ghosts, he said. Then stop haunting me, she whispered. He smiled slow and deep, the kind that didn't fade easy. The wind carried the smell of earth and wood smoke between them, a quiet promise neither had to speak. Come on, she said finally. If you're staying forever, you can start by fixing that roof before it rains. Yes, ma'am, he said, and for the first time in years, the word forever didn't sound like a prison. It sounded like home. By the week's end, the sky began to gather gray, clouds rolling low over the ridge like the earth had decided to breathe through thunder. Elias felt it in the air before the first drop fell, that tight stillness that warns a man he's about to meet the sky's temper. He was stacking wood near the barn when Clara called from the porch, her voice sharp but steady. The river's rising. He dropped the axe and looked toward the valley where water glinted in the distance, already wider than it had been that morning. Get what you can inside, he said, striding toward her. Together they pulled in the laundry, the feed, the tools, moving quick and wordless like two people who'd done this dance before. The wind whipped harder, bending the birches, rattling the window panes. By the time the rain came, it wasn't falling. It was attacking, slamming the roof like fists demanding entry. Inside, the fire struggled, hissing under the draft. Elias shoved another log in and blocked the lower vent with his coat. She's angry tonight, Clara said over the roar. She'll calm, he replied. They always do. But she could see the flicker of worry behind his calm, and it made her chest tighten. If the river breaks, she said, we'll lose the barn. Better the barn than us, he said. I'll go check the ridge. You'll drown if you try. Then I'll drown standing, he said, pulling on his hat. She grabbed his arm. Don't, she whispered, and something in that word made him stop. Her hand was small against his sleeve, but steady as a prayer. If you go out there, I can't follow. He looked at her, the lantern light trembling between them, and saw the fear in her eyes, not of the storm, but of losing him. Then I won't make you wait, he said. He shut the door tight and sat beside her on the floor as the rain hammered above them. Used to be I'd chase every storm, he said. Thought I could outlast them. And now? She asked. Now I know better. The wind shrieked through the cracks, water running in small rivers beneath the door. She leaned her head against his shoulder, eyes closed, the fire painting them both in gold. Tell me something good, she whispered. He thought for a moment, then said, When this passes, the air will smell clean again. The river will be louder, but softer somehow. The ground will give us flowers. She smiled, eyes still closed. And us? We'll still be here, he said, 'cause I ain't letting go. She reached for his hand, found it, and held tight. Hours passed like minutes. The storm shouting itself hoarse, until finally the sound softened, replaced by the drip of rain easing off the roof. When Elias opened the door, dawn was breaking, the sky torn open with color. Pink, gold, and silver all at once. The world looked scrubbed, forgiven. He turned back to her, soaked and smiling. Told you, he said. Storms don't win. She stepped into the doorway beside him, the wind lifting her hair, and whispered, Maybe not when you're here. He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time realized the storm had washed away more than rain. It had taken the distance between them, too. That evening the world smelled of wet earth and pine, the air still humming from the storm's memory. The sky outside the cabin glowed faintly orange, where the sun dipped behind the ridge, and inside, a single candle burned on the table, its flame steady and small, like it had decided to believe in peace again. Clara was mending a tear in Elias's sleeve, her fingers working slow, her hair loose around her face. He sat opposite her, boots off, one hand cradling a mug of coffee gone cold, watching her in the kind of silence that feels like prayer. You don't have to fix it tonight, he said quietly. You tore it saving my roof, she answered without looking up. Seems fair. I told you I'd stay, he said. Didn't say I'd break things doing it. She smiled faintly, a thread of laughter in her voice. You've done worse. He leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. You always this stubborn. Only when I care, she said. The words hung in the space between them, and the candle's flame swayed as if it had felt the weight of them too. He reached across the table, fingers brushing hers just long enough to make her hand still. Clara, he said softly, and she looked up, startled by the sound of her name spoken like that, like it was something sacred. You ever think about what comes next? He asked. Tomorrow? She said. Beyond it, he said, after the fences are fixed and the storm stopped testing us. She set down the needle, eyes searching his. I've thought about it, she said. Mostly I just don't want to be alone again. You won't be, he said. She swallowed hard, blinking back something that wasn't quite tears. You can't promise that. I can, he said. And I am. The wind shifted outside, brushing the cabin walls, and the candle flame bent but didn't go out. He stood then, slow, deliberate, walking around the table until he was beside her. I've spent half my life running from the world, he said, but it never once ran from me. I think I was meant to stop here. She looked up at him, the candlelight catching the gold in her eyes. You sure? She whispered. Sure enough to bet forever, he said. Her breath caught. Forever's a long road. Then it's about time I started walking it right, he said. She stood too, small beside him, her hand lifting to his chest where the scar showed faint beneath his shirt. You think we can build something out of what's left of us? That's the only thing worth building, he said. What's broken learns to hold stronger. Her eyes softened, and she leaned forward until her forehead touched his chest, her voice a tremor against him. Then stay. I already did, he whispered. The candle guttered once, throwing their shadows across the wall, two shapes made from the same light. Outside, the night settled clean and still, the storm's ghosts gone quiet. And for the first time in years, Elias felt the ground beneath him stop moving. In that tiny cabin, with the scent of bread cooling and the sound of her breath close to his heart, Forever didn't feel far anymore. It felt found. The days that followed slipped into rhythm. Quiet mornings, mended fences, bread baking in the oven, the world rebuilding itself one heartbeat at a time. Elias rode out to the ridge each sunrise to check the cattle, the mist curling around him like memory. And by the time he returned, Clara would be at the porch kneading dough or hanging laundry, the kind of peace in her eyes that made a man forget what wandering ever felt like. It was life, simple but whole, until the letter came. A rider from town brought it one afternoon, a boy barely 16, his horse wet with sweat. "Message from Clearwater," he said, handing the envelope to Elias before turning back down the trail. Elias held it without opening it, thumb running over the seal like he could read the weight of it through the paper. Clara watched from the doorway, her heart already uneasy. "Bad news?" she asked. "Not sure yet," he said. He broke the seal and read, eyes scanning slow. When he finished, he folded the paper once, twice, and slipped it into his coat. "It's from my brother," he said. "He's sick, wants me to come." Her voice caught. "How far?" 3 days south," he said. "River country." She nodded, trying to keep her voice even. "You'll go then." "He's family," he said quietly. "I have to." "I know." The words came out thin, small as a sigh. That night she made stew and fresh bread, though neither ate much. The silence between them wasn't angry. It was the ache of knowing the world doesn't stop just because you wish it would. After supper, he found her sitting by the fire, mending one of his shirts. "You'll need it on the road," she said without looking up. "Clara," he said, but she kept sewing. "If I could stay, I would." "I know," she said again, "and I wouldn't ask you to choose." He crouched beside her, resting his hand over hers until she stopped stitching. "I'll come back," he said. "I always keep my word." She looked at him then, eyes bright in the firelight. "That's what I'm afraid of," she whispered, "that you'll keep it even if the world makes it hard." He smiled, soft but sure. "World's always hard, but it's smaller than what we built here." He reached into his pocket, pulled out the small wooden button she'd carved for his coat weeks ago. "You keep this," he said, "so the house don't forget me." She took it, closing her fingers around it like a promise. "You better come back before the bread runs out," she said. "Wouldn't dream of missing it," he replied. The next morning, before dawn, he saddled the horse, the light just breaking over the ridge. She stood at the doorway wrapped in his coat, the wind tugging at her hair. "Elias," she called. He turned, and for a heartbeat neither spoke. Then she said the words she hadn't dared the night before. "I'll wait." He nodded, tipping his hat, voice rough. "Then I'll hurry." When he rode out, the sun hit the cabin roof and caught in the window glass, flaring bright, a small fire refusing to go out. She watched until the horizon swallowed him, then turned back inside, the smell of baked bread lingering like a vow that hadn't yet been broken. The trail south cut through open country, all dust and sunlight, the kind of land that humbles a man just by asking him to cross it. Elias rode steady, hat low against the wind, the horizon stretching endless ahead. 3 days on the road gave him too much time to think about Clara's laugh, about the smell of bread cooling on the table, about promises made over candlelight that still burned in his chest. He reached Clearwater by the 4th evening, the town smaller than he remembered, quieter too. His brother's house stood near the edge of the creek, a thin wisp of smoke curling from the chimney. When Elias knocked, the door opened slow, and the years between them vanished. "Didn't think you'd come," Thomas said, voice rough. "You wrote," Elias replied. "Didn't give me much choice." Thomas grinned weakly, then coughed, leaning on the doorframe. "Still can't tell when I'm joking." Inside, the place smelled of medicine and ash. Elias helped him back to bed, sitting close as the light dimmed. They talked long into the night about old wounds, old roads, and how time forgives even when people don't. Thomas laughed once, a dry, tired sound. "You still running from peace?" he asked. Elias shook his head. "Found a place that won't let me." "Her name?" "Clara." "You love her?" Elias looked at his hands, rough and scarred. "Enough to stay." Thomas nodded, eyes closing. "Then you've done what I couldn't." By morning, he was gone. a smile still faint on his lips like he'd finally heard his own forgiveness. Elias buried him beneath the birch tree by the river, carved a cross from cedar, and said nothing. Some goodbyes didn't need words. When the wind rose, it carried the sound of water and something that felt like peace. He rode north before sunset, the trail colder now, every mile a memory of what waited for him. The days blurred, dust, stars, the whisper of hooves. On the third night, he saw the ridge again, the faint glow of a lantern flickering through the pines, and his chest loosened for the first time since leaving. When he reached the cabin, the door opened before he could knock. Clara stood there, hair undone, eyes wide. "You came back," she whispered. "Told you I would." She stepped forward, touching his coat like she wasn't sure he was real. "I thought maybe." "You shouldn't," he said softly. "Not about me." She looked past him toward the empty saddle. "Your brother?" "Gone home," he said. "The kind that don't break." She nodded, tears bright in the lamplight. "Then you did what you had to." "Now I'll do what I want to," he said, voice low. She smiled through the tears. "And what's that?" He took off his hat, set it on the rail, and said, "Stay." She breathed out a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob, and he caught her as she stepped into him. The wind sighed through the trees, the river murmured below, and the door swung shut behind them. The world, for once, didn't need to be fixed. It just needed to be kept. Spring settled early that year, the kind that arrives gentle, like it doesn't want to wake the land too fast. The snow on the ridge melted into narrow streams that whispered through the fields, and the air carried the scent of grass instead of frost. Elias worked the soil out back, turning it dark and rich under the morning sun. Each strike of the spade sounded like punctuation on a new sentence. Clara watched from the porch, hands folded around a cup of coffee, the breeze tugging at her hair. "You'll wear yourself out," she called. "Wouldn't be the worst way to go," he said without looking up. "You fix fences, chop wood, now you plant things," she said. "You building a farm or a monument?" "Maybe both," he said. "Something that'll last longer than wandering." She smiled, shaking her head. "You talk like a man who's learned patience." "No," he said, glancing up. "I'm learning belonging." She came down the steps, the sunlight turning her shawl to gold, and took the spade from his hands. "You shouldn't do all of it alone," she said. "Wasn't planning to." They worked side by side, silent but sure, the rhythm of shared purpose louder than words. When they finished, he leaned on the handle, breathing deep, eyes tracing the stretch of land. "Never thought I'd call any place mine," he said. "It's ours," she corrected softly. He looked at her, the way her eyes held light, the way her hair brushed her cheek in the wind, and nodded once. "Ours," he repeated. That afternoon, they repaired the barn roof, laughter breaking between them as easily as conversation once had. The world seemed to have forgotten its cruelty. And for the first time since either could remember, peace felt ordinary. At dusk, they sat on the porch steps, watching the sky turn red behind the pines. "You ever miss the road?" she asked. "Sometimes," he said. "But I miss less than I used to. The road don't hold much once you've found what it leads to." "And what's that?" "You," he said. She looked down, smiling through the warmth creeping into her chest. "You say things that make a woman believe again." "Then maybe I'll keep saying them," he said. The light faded, and she rested her head on his shoulder, her hand brushing his. He didn't move, didn't need to. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "I want to plant flowers by the fence." "Any kind you like," he said, "so long as they stay." "They will," she whispered. "They'll have to. We both do." When night came, the stars were bright and low, as if they'd come closer just to see. The world was quiet except for the hum of crickets and the creak of the old rocking chair on the porch. Elias watched the lantern burn low, the glow soft on Clara's face as she drifted to sleep beside him. He thought of every place he'd left behind, every face he'd forgotten, and realized none of them mattered now. The road had led him here, to this cabin, this woman, this small life that finally fit. The wind brushed the trees, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers from the ridge, and he smiled to himself. "Forever," he whispered, tasting the word like something earned. For once it didn't sound impossible. It sounded true. The morning came soft and slow, light spilling through the cabin window like it already knew it belonged there. Elias woke first, the sound of birds outside mixing with the faint rustle of wind through the birches. Clara still slept, her hand resting on his chest, her breath steady, her hair tangled against his arm. For a long time he didn't move. He just watched the sunlight touch the corner of the quilt, climbing higher until it reached her face. She stirred, eyes opening with that half-dreamed look of someone who's forgotten for a heartbeat what sorrow is. "You're awake early," she whispered. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Didn't want to miss this." "It's just morning," she said, smiling. "Not to me," he replied. He rose, pulling on his boots, and stepped outside, into air so clean it felt like grace. The sky was wide, brushed with pink and gold, and the earth still smelled of yesterday's rain. He could see the field they'd planted starting to green, tiny shoots pushing through the soil like hope, refusing to stay buried. He walked to the fence line, ran his hand along the new rails they'd built together, and for the first time in his life, he felt still. No urge to ride, no road calling his name. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of baking bread from inside, and he smiled. When Clara came out with 2 cups of coffee, he turned to meet her halfway. "You think it'll hold?" she asked, nodding toward the field. "If we keep tending it," he said. "Things worth keeping always need work." "Like people?" she teased. "Like us," he said. They stood side by side, the sunrise painting the world in warmth. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her, the both of them quiet as the wind settled. "You ever think you were meant to find this?" she asked. "No," he said. "I think I was meant to deserve it." She turned to him, eyes glinting. "And do you?" "Now I do." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, like the land itself had joined in their stillness. Somewhere down the valley, the river caught the first light of day, gleaming like molten gold, and a hawk rose from the trees, its wings flashing in the sun. "Looks like he's staying too," Clara said. "Guess we all found a home," Elias replied. She smiled, that small, certain smile that had changed his life the first night he saw it. "What now?" she asked. He looked around at the world they'd built, the cabin, the fields, the smoke curling from the chimney, and said, "Now we keep it." "Forever," she whispered. He nodded. "Forever." She slipped her hand into his, their fingers locking together like something carved to fit, and they stood there as the light spread over everything they'd saved, everything they'd chosen to love. The wind carried the scent of bread and wildflowers, the sound of the river, the quiet hum of belonging. It was enough. The world didn't need to be bigger. It just needed to stay this true. If this story warmed a corner of your heart, let it remind you that love doesn't always arrive with thunder. It comes softly, like morning light through a cabin window. Leave a like. Share this with someone who believes in quiet forever, and subscribe to Redemption West, where mercy endures, love redeems, and every ending feels like home.